Well, welcome everybody. Today we are going to talk to three of the folks who had involvement at different stages of the development and engineering of EPCOT Center. And I should pull my notes out if we're going to do that because it helps me. Bob Gurr, Disney legend, is here with us. Figure there's no better way to get everybody awake than to start with Billy Flanagan and Tammy Tuckey singing and then have Bob Gurr in the first panel. And what we're going to do is we're going to run through, Bob and I are going to chat a little bit, and then Bob Holland over here is going to give us a little slideshow on some of his things. If you've listened to his magnum opus interview on the Progress City podcast, I think there's about 4 hours on there that covers a fascinating array of Disney history. And then Steve Alcorn, many of you who have read his book, will take us through a terrific photo journey through the construction of EPCOT. So we welcome Bob Gurr. And Bob, my first question is that Walt Disney was a movie maker, television, entertainment, built theme parks. What was it like at Imagineering when he suddenly decided, you know what, we should build a city?
Well, before all of that, is this on?
It is.
Okay. Before all of that, EPCOT actually started about 1956 because Disneyland, as it opened, people thought it was going to fail. By Christmas time, it was going to be a success, and Walt added a whole bunch of attractions in 1956. 1958, the Brussels World's Fair started. Walt picked up a group of people and sent them over to Brussels. We had people from Walt Disney Productions, WED, and Disneyland to look at the future. Brussels, 1958. By 1960, Walt had decided there's going to do 3 attractions for the New York World's Fair. Some of it was going to talk about the future. By 1962, he sent a bunch of us up to the Seattle World's Fair. We're going to look at the future. Pretty soon, there was rumbles of a thing called Project X, which went around the company for quite a few years. Then suddenly, in 1965, about October, the news about Walt Disney World opening broke ground in publicity prematurely. Remember, there's a story about that newspaper lady working down here, sniffed around with Walt, and then one day was out at the studio and just bluntly looked at him and says, I understand you just bought all that property. And Walt was totally shocked that his whole cover had been blown. He had all this subterfuge how to buy this property. Anyway, immediately we were sent to work on EPCOT. So EPCOT had that kind of a head start. Now this got very, very serious between October of 1965. By 1966, in January, Walt took a group of us on the plane, the Little Mouse, to visit several companies on a sales junket. Now remember, I'm just the car guy in the company, design all this stuff, and I was assigned to transportation design for EPCOT. To sit in a meeting with the chairman of the board of Westinghouse, many vice presidents, and watch Walt try to explain EPCOT to these high-level business people, and I saw so many blank stares. What in the world is Walt talking about? This was my first warning that, this is not going to be easy. We went over to General Electric. Same thing. What? They had a hard time trying to understand that. So I think what happened was we started to change the pitch to try to explain it a little bit better, and while getting ready to do that, Walt was gone. EPCOT stopped completely for years, and it wasn't until 1972 that all of a sudden Cardwalker, our then vice president of the company, said, what are we going to do? And he came over to WED, and we waited for the instructions from the top of the company. his question to us was, what are you guys going to do? And I remember we just stopped breathing. We saw that not only did we lose Walt, I think we just lost EPCOT, because Card Walker, president, did not know what we're going to do. In any event, there was a program called the Wednesday Morning Club, which was about 12 or 13 of us, a big mix all across the company, in which we were to meet every Wednesday morning for a couple hours and pick up where Walt passed off these ideas. What in the world did Walt have in mind? And he'd been gone a number of years, and we were in a pickle. What in the world is going to be an EPCOT? Anyway, this was a long-winded series of meetings, went for months and months and months. Marty Sklar was there. He was the chairman of the meeting. And we found out a whole bunch of reasons why this would not work. So this is a precursor to what later was done in a book, Walt Disney and the Search for Community. Some of you own that book. This fella came around and he talked to everybody that had done any work on EPCOT and interviewed every single one of them. And the half of that book is the bibliography of every one of those conversations to try to put in print the transition of EPCOT from Walt's idea through the Wednesday Morning Club up into the actual execution of EPCOT. The last part that I had to do with it was work from 1972 to about 1978, wherein I got in a bit of a dispute over the machinery in the spaceship Earth, in which I was a little more conservative than the chief engineer, who was very frisky about doing a mechanical machine inside a golf ball. And as it turned out, everybody who works here knows the spaceship Earth is, it likes to eat wheels every night. Every morning you put wheels on the darn thing. So I didn't feel too bad when I was asked to come down here again by Arnold Lindbergh of Central Shops. We have to take a look. Do we keep fixing it, or do we stop and make a proper design for it? The answer was, the guests like it. We'll just keep running it. And you guys set a budget to buy thousands of wheels a year and smile. So that constituted the end of my effort on it all those years, from about 1965 all the way to 78, wherein I was transferred to Tokyo Disneyland.
Bob literally just went through every question I had for him in one answer. However, literally, all the questions. We were like, I'll ask you this, I'll ask you that. The Spaceship Earth ride system, he's just gone through. He did mention this book, but Bob said to me, get this book, and everybody write it down or watch the video later. And he said, read the last sentence in the book, how he closes the book, which I will do. And you can see it up on the screen. It says, Imagineer Bob Gurr asked recently what he thought Walt Disney would be doing now if he were still alive, replied half seriously, still struggling with EPCOT. Feel free to expound, Bob.
Well, interestingly, a lot of people question, why is this EPCOT not Walt's EPCOT? But a lot of other people come to EPCOT every day now, and they find it one of the most charming parks in the world. I find EPCOT the way it is today, and it's always different every time I come here. I'm happily looking forward at my age, 92, I want to be 100 and come in and see the next EPCOT. Well, the point being, when you ask questions about EPCOT, there's a lot of obscure history that went through so many changes with so many people. So your EPCOT you have here today is none of the above, in a way. But it's an EPCOT that, as Walt would say with Disneyland, when it opened, it'll never be finished. So I'd like to come back in another 100 years and see the EPCOT by the end of this century and see what it looks like. So I think it's going to turn out Walt was going to have the experimental prototype community tomorrow, but it turns out this is a living, changing experiment with every kind of ideas, not necessarily focused on a community, where the original idea that he had basically was he would provide the land, provide the infrastructure, and invite all kinds of creative companies around America to come here and put on experimental portions of ideas with their employees would be living here as a sabbatical for quite some periods of time to demonstrate firsthand to our guests what the future is like as it would be coming along. But there was a great number of reasons why that would not work, particularly within a jurisdiction of a federal government, state governments, local jurisdictions, all the kind of thing. Do people on sabbatical live here? Where do they vote? Where do their kids go to school? On and on and on. So it was an illustration of when you dream big, you're going to have to slow down and you're going to have to start filling in the blanks of practical reality. And that's what we faced in that Wednesday morning club. We kind of anguished over all those years until we got an EPCOT described enough that Card Walker, who's a born salesman, could go out and start to sell. You're going to ask me about selling.
Well, you answered it already. You told us you went on these trips with Walt and they were agog when you asked them questions. But I did want to tell everybody that Bob has a program from their trip to Westinghouse, January of 1966, that will be with him when he's out there signing, so he can show it to you and tell you about his trip out there to Westinghouse and how confounded they were by whatever Walt was telling them, right?
But at the same time, they were showing Walt experimental things. And remember, this is January 66. Walt and I are looking at the first laser we have ever seen, and I remember vividly Walt looking at that and looking at the rest of us, and the group says, oh boy, you know how we could really tell stories better with laser? So Walt was always looking at the next big scientific thing, not just for the science. He always saw stuff as storytelling tools. And that was a very vivid experience to see him learn like that.
Well, thank you, Bob Gurr, for your stories, and we're going to let some of these other guys give their little slideshow now, if that's all right. And we're going to sit here like... You stay up here with me, because we're going to play a little Statler and Waldorf here as these guys are running through their presentations. Just a caveat here. You'll notice we're not doing a long introduction for each of these folks. That's why you have the program books with the lengthy biographies in there, so we don't spend a lot of time on stage introducing people that a lot of you already know. I'm going to hand this to Bob Holland.
Thank you.
And both Bob and Steve have 30-minute slide presentations that we're going to get done in about 20 minutes apiece. So.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here for the first time. I joined WED in summer of 1979. I was hired by John Zovich, who was the Vice President of Engineering, and by Miller Andrus, who was named the resident engineer for the building of EPCOT Center. And what you see up there on the slide is about what I saw when I first came to the site. It looked a bit like a desert. It was crazy, and I had never worked on anything of this scale before. What was most, I think, shocking, particularly today, where nobody announces opening dates, was we had an opening date 3 years plus in advance. And it was a fixed date, and we had to make it. And today they say, well, late '92 or whatever. And we had a real date. Also, there was an enormous amount of publicity. This happens to be the largest engineering construction magazine, but it was also in a lot of the regular journals that people would see. There was just tremendous publicity all along the way. about the project and when it was going to open. And this is a clip from the Orlando Sentinel when we actually did make it, and it was a little bit of a rocky road from time to time. So as far as resident engineering, what we did is we provide quality assurance, design intent, code, good practice, which was really important to WED for show intent and Walt Disney World operations for maintenance and safety. We also coordinated design changes. As you can imagine, there were 1 or 2 changes in this project. And there were literally thousands of drawings and documents coming through our office each week with something changing. So it was our job to make sure that all got distributed and documented correctly. We were the interface between WED California and their third-party consultants, Tishman, the construction manager, and the Reedy Creek Building Department, and other people like that. We also, from time to time, backfilled for the WED project, California project managers or project engineers, because they couldn't be in Florida all the time. We had field architects, engineers, construction managers, and superintendents, and we did not make aesthetic decisions unless it was absolutely necessary, which happened not too often. It was a huge project. Some people say it was the largest private project in the world or U.S. at that time. It was an extremely challenging site, which I'll talk about for a few minutes, because you kind of had to get dirty before you built all these wonderful pavilions and rides that followed. There was an awful lot of muck and drainage and infrastructure construction. There's really a lack of qualified construction people at the time in Central Florida. It was not the big town it is today. Also, the company decided to make it a union contract because of, my understanding, some issues with the studio contract. And because of that, we had to use union contractors, of which there were almost none in Central Florida. So that made it very challenging. In some cases, how do I get forward here? I'm sorry, I'm looking at 2 different screens here. There we go.
There we go.
In some cases, there were late design documents because of this marketing of the project to various companies. I think had an impact. There was a massive number of documents, of course, and we were always trying to improve. And there was a lot of really innovative ride systems, Spaceship Earth Energy and Imagination in particular. So what you're seeing on the screen, instead of what I'm seeing on the screen, because I can't read the little one, enormous infrastructure development. This is an aerial of the site, again, about a few months later, perhaps. And what probably you don't realize, particularly if you're new to this area, there was nothing here. I mean, there was the Magic Kingdom and an entry road and Lake Buena Vista and not much else. And this really was in the middle of nowhere. So there were no roads to it, no utilities to it, no sewage from it, no central energy plant, nothing. And you can see there in the middle where the lagoon is starting to be constructed. And now we didn't go forward at all. There we go. If you've, obviously all of you have flown over Central Florida, it looks a bit like Swiss cheese. One of the reasons it looks that way is because all of the sinkholes, these small round and some cases very large round lakes, is because of subsidence of the local rock structure. And that occurs on the Walt Disney World site as well. So on the left here, you see a diagram of a sinkhole in Central Florida. On the right, you see muck being removed. Muck can be removed down to about 15 feet with a drag line and then basically hauled off. And it looks and smells like you might think it would. It's basically decomposed root matter. Because what happens is when the sinkhole happens, over eons, the root matter and trees and other things fall in there, and they create a mess.
Bob, is there a worse piece of land you could build here?
Oh yeah, I mean this was actually the best piece of land at Walt Disney World to build something this big. So no, yes, I'm sure there's much worse. But you can see how what happens is the limestone gives away, and then all the clay and sand and what just sinks. So if I can get this to move forward up there, you'll see my great diagramming here. This is why I was hired to build things and not animate things for Disney. But anyway, one of the ways, if you can't haul away, you do what's called a surcharge. Muck is a lot like a sponge that you can compress it and all the water runs out. The difference is with a new sponge anyhow is once you compress it, the sponge will come back up. Muck, however, when you compress it, it stays down, okay? So the idea when you can't remove it, let's say it's more than about 15 feet deep, and we had some places where it was who knows how deep, you use the surcharge. You're piling this extra sand on top of it. Okay, so here you see a crude section, again demonstrating why I don't do animation. And we really had muck to infinity and beyond in those two islands that are in the lagoon that you see being constructed there. So what they did is they logged off the trees, however they left the root mat, because the root mat acted as a structural platform to put this surcharge on it. However, the muck wouldn't hold the surcharge, so they had to build dikes. So think, the little Dutchman and building dikes in there. And then we keep piling sand on top of it and piling sand on top of it with the idea that the weight will, compress the muck. And the question is how long? In the case of these at EPCOT, I think they were like a year or more. And I asked the geotechnical engineer, well, how do you decide when to take it off? And he said, oh, that's a six-pack decision. And I said, well, what do you mean it's a six-pack decision? He said, well, the owner's always pressing me to get the surcharge off because they want to build the building or whatever it is, but I have to have enough guts to tell them it's okay to take it off, so that's after a six-pack. So anyway, that was the explanation of that. The issue, however, was the potential of the dreaded muck wave. With piling all the sand on top, if you didn't do it very carefully, and very evenly, it's possible that that dike would break away and then the muck would flow out into the area where you want the good lagoon water. So my boss, who was an ex-military guy, in his infinite wisdom, decided to have a 24/7 muck wave watch. We had superintendents that during the day that could watch it, but they couldn't watch it 24 hours a day. However, apparently we could work 24 hours a day, the rest of us. So each of us would be assigned certain nights we'd have to come in. The night I came in, it was stormy and rainy and everything else, and about every hour I'd drive out to the site in the company vehicle. I'd see water on the site. I didn't know whether the water was 6 inches deep or 6 feet deep. And I pulled up to the edge of the lagoon, and all I could see was the little headlights of the dozer, moving dirt around, and I couldn't see it. I don't know what a muck wave looks like. So anyway, that's how the evening went. And about 7 o'clock in the morning, my boss came in. He says, Holland, how did you let a muck wave happen? And I said, what muck wave? He said, we had a muck wave last night. And I said, I couldn't see anything. And he said, oh, don't worry about it. It was a small one. We can take care of it. So anyway, that was the last time I served muck wave watch. Anyway, what happens is actually the top, in my poor animation, the top should be going down. But anyway, it presses the muck down to a point that you hope it's far enough below the lagoon. So your section of the lagoon looks something like that. And then they built like 1.5 million miles of, 1.5 million, 1.5, seemed like 1.5 million, 1.5 miles of architectural seawall. Then they started filling lagoons, somewhat naturally because the water will come up on its own, but it was also supplemented with pumping water. And then hopefully you end up with a lagoon that looks like this. Well, it wasn't quite that easy because those two islands there were really problematic. They didn't know where the bottom of the muck was on those, and they also had an enormous amount of, not as deep, but muck that had to be removed. So once they brought trucks in to get enough out that they could let the thing fill with water, they brought in dredges. So you can see a dredge there working on the left. On the right, you can see one of the muck islands in the front that does not have a surcharge on it, and way in the back, one of the muck islands that has a surcharge on it. And so they got rid of the shallow muck, but that was a problem to get rid of that fast enough as well. And they also needed a large quantity of sand for the island surcharges. So the dredges, what they would do is where they were working in areas that had clean sand, they would just pump it up onto these islands and then let a small dozer move it around. However, they needed to pump an enormous quantity away from the lagoon too. So what they did is, you may wonder why they have kind of long and narrow lakes at Caribbean Beach and Pop and what have you. And the reason was those were the borrow pits for EPCOT. That's where they were hauling out good clean sand and taking it up to EPCOT for fill. Now you realize there was nothing else there. All these other things you see didn't exist. So what they did is they built a pipeline that ran from the dredges down to, if you wonder where the Skyway goes over and you see these three lakes, and then you have one that sort of looks like a dried up swamp, well, that's where we were pumping the muck into. It was an old borrow pit, and we let the muck settle out, and then we would pump, I wouldn't call it clean water, but at least not so mucky water into the other places where the sand had been removed, and then they would pump relatively clean sand and water back to be used for the dredges to pile it on top of the lagoon. It was a 2-mile closed circuit, water, muck, and sand, and it was the first time ever at such a large scale. Won a bunch of engineering awards. So nothing that you would know being a guest, but it was pretty incredible. I originally was worried about roofs and flashings and all those kinds of things. Within a year, I got much more involved in the actual building of the buildings. So my focus initially was on world of motion, transportation, energy pavilion, and then at the very end, spaceship Earth. You see energy here. Energy Pavilion, if you remember, I'm sure all of you do, have the large theater cars that drive around the pavilion in the loop, as you see there by the blue arrow, starting in the large pie-shaped theater in the front. Where circled here, are two very large doors that I think they're about 80, 90 feet long, and they drop about 18 feet into a pit. Cars actually drive right over and then into the diorama, and then eventually into the second theater, and then back into the third theater. Somehow the turntable circles moved, I think. Sorry about that. But there's two large turntables there. One's about 100 feet in diameter, and one's about 90 feet in diameter. And of course, there was embedded wire, guide wire, and also wireless induction charging. We're all used to charging our telephones today with wireless induction, and this was certainly the first time, I believe, that was done on such a large scale. So here you see the theater cars, each weigh about 30,000 pounds apiece and seat almost 96 passengers. And in this picture, they're actually sitting on one of the turntables, and you can see where the wire guide path is. Here you can see them in the theater. That mirror wall, the curtain went up, the mirror wall, and where the blue is there, that's where the mirror wall drops into the floor so they can drive into the diorama. And of course, see the fantastic diorama.
Bob, this is where I'm going to jump in.
Is this where you're going to jump in?
If this works, we got some film that we don't think anyone has ever seen before. And this is Card Walker and Marty Sklar and Dick Nunes and others on the back lot in some fantastic clothing, testing the base of these ride vehicles for the first time. And we'll play it for a while. You want to listen to two things. At the outset, there's a point where Dick Nunes says to Charlie Ridgway, who's the PR director, who's either filming or directing the filming, saying, "Don't get run over." And then there's a point where Card Walker, if you're listening, asks one of the engineers, who you probably know, "Is this the same system we use in the water down there at Walt Disney World?" And that would be a referral to the Swan boats, which ran on a guide wire a lot like this system. So let's see if it's there.
Do I need to do anything? Click? Or?
You should click, and we'll see if it's there. And then one more click should start it. That's Card Walker in the center.
Do I have to do something to start it? Or?
Click one more.
Don't get run over, Charlie.
Takes off at 90 miles an hour. Both sides of each vehicle.
Control computer.
No operator on
Will that sound, will that really be muffled with the...
We didn't look for that. What is that?
Sounds always here.
That's a here.
One more click,
One
he
more
says.
click.
And one more.
One more.
Just picking up.
There we go.
Is this the system they use in the water over there? No, sir.
No, but it's the same basic principle.
You can watch the wheel. Use the system for your lips coming in the market. You can watch that arm. Hey, Nick. Those wheels out.
Tell him that the vehicle will repeat itself when they ride for it. Slightly from one revolution to the next to the next.
Go one more time, Gurr.
All right, we're all going to run out and get some white Sansa slacks. Go
Here
ahead.
you
Wait, Bob Gurr's got something
Okay,
to
go,
contribute
Bob.
here.
Did you know there's only 6 cars on that ride?
I did not.
Did you know that it started with 76 cars?
Wow.
You're going to talk to John DeCure later.
Yes.
Okay, you want to ask him a question. His father came over on a Saturday and lectured us on a really nifty way to do the energy show. And it had 76 cars with more switches than Carter's got liver pills. And as he walked out the door, he says, "Thank you very much. I got my money. I'm going home. You got the job." And Marty gave the job to Claude, and I said, "You guys figure it out." So Claude is the best guy to work with. You got a show guy and a mechanical guy. We go back and forth every day. How about this? How about this? How about this? How about this? Got it all the way down. It says, "We're going to do a wire guide flat floor, and I'm going to make cars that look like a theater, and then the theater breaks up when the people get in it." And that's how this happened. But I have never seen the test of this sucker that it actually worked, because we thought it would, and it did work.
There it goes. It even stayed within the cones. Thank you, Bob Gurr.
Okay. This was shortly after I arrived in Florida. This is the big curved door that's between the First Theater and the diorama. And frankly, it's probably one of the largest structures I had worked on in my life when I got there. Anyway, the pit floors proved to be very problematic. I was not in charge of really any ride engineering. I was in charge of trying to get the facility done and the interface with the ride engineers and what have you, but ride engineering was not my thing. What was my thing, however, was to get these pit floors. I think they're about 2 feet deep or something like that. One's about 100 feet and one's about 95 or 85 or something like that. And the original spec called for, high-strength concrete, and we told them it had to be extremely smooth, and we told them to work it and work it and work it and work it. And then we put together the turntable, which was no small feat, because giant steel structure. We put it in there, we hooked it all up, and it ran kind of nicely for about 5 minutes, then it started going boom, boom, boom. What the devil's going on? We lifted up the plates on the floor of the turntable, and we could see it was blowing off the top of the concrete floor. And we had them work the concrete so hard that it brings fines up, and there's sort of like micro cracks in there, and the air from the turntable would blow the floor up. So then we brought in a guy. Do we back on? Okay, we brought in a guy, we chipped up the floor, he put in one of these really high-strength, super flat industrial warehouse floors. He said, "Oh, it worked for sure." Nope. Boom. Well, it didn't boom so much, it screamed. But anyway, it didn't work. So then we brought in Have Torch Will Travel, J.R. Stitt. He was a guy that was probably about 80 years old at the time. He was an expert in peening, which is heating up metal structures to get rid of deformities and welding and what have you. So we welded, fully welded steel plate floor across both of these turntables. And that was a partial success. It ran pretty well, but it was a little bit noisy. And then if any of you know Bob Lamb, who was the PICO coordinator for this, later became head of Animal Kingdom Park, he decided to put baby powder down. And it was a super success. It was quiet and wonderful, a little dusty, but it worked really, really well. But I was getting more and more involved in sort of, not really ride engineering, but the interface of the ride engineering with the facility. And I said to John, I said, "But I'm a dumb architect. Why am I doing this?" And John said, "You know, I have some of the brightest engineers in the world." And he said, Buena Vista Construction, which is doing all the show and ride installations sometimes, you know, they're an excellent construction company. The problem is they're all focused like this. And he said, you as an architect, you're trained much more as a generalist and see the big picture and understand that the only thing that really matters is guests get on the ride, it's reliable, and they go, wow, what a great ride, and they clap at the end. And so I thought that was an interesting statement. But what was happening is the engineers would get so focused on a problem because we were doing concurrent installation of show and ride and some facility work, which you shouldn't do, but you always do. And somebody had to orchestrate all that because the engineers would get working and then they'd finish their thing and then they'd disappear. And Buena Vista Construction would be standing around saying, can we work now? And so I basically chased after people and said, are you done? How much more do you have? Can they go for an hour? So that's what we did. Anyway, in doing this air bearing thing, I called Morton I tried to find somebody that had big air bearings or using them. And Morton Thiaco, who was building the shuttle boosters at the time, I called them and got a hold of one of their engineers. And I said, you use air bearings? Oh, yeah. I said, you move the shuttle boosters around? Oh, yeah. They must be pretty heavy. Yep, they are. And I said, are they noisy? Oh, yeah. I said, well, how often do you move them? Maybe once a week. And I said, well, do they like scream and pop and tear up your floors? Oh, yeah. And so I explained to him what we were doing. And I said, well, we have this ride, and it has to be super quiet, and it runs, cycles like, 5 times every 20 minutes or something, and, 18 hours a day. And he said, you guys are crazy. Anyway, we finally got to fix Spaceship Earth. Of course, the structure originally a geodesic dome, Buckminster Fuller, and the lead consultant on that was Simpson, Gumpertz, and Hager, the one both for us and also the one in Montreal. These are the very large legs, not the one in the middle. That's just the elevator core, which doesn't hold anything up. But you can see 2 of the very large legs up and the foundations and some of the steel that goes in there. And then they're tied together so that the legs don't want to walk away. They're tied together with giant grade beams. On the first level of the structure, they build this giant double truss, which you can see on the left here being built. And everything basically comes off of that. The ride loop, the sphere itself, and the sphere is hung off of these quadrupods, which I think you can see a little bit better here. There are these kind of complex structures that they're coming off of just that lower truss level, and which is there at the support level. And what happens is the ride ramp is supported completely independently from the sphere itself. There is no connection except at the quadrupods. And I remember, I wasn't in the building, but the first time they did an E-stop and they felt the whole ride ramp system rotate, and everybody freaked out. They called Simpson, Gumper, Hager, said, don't worry about it, it's supposed to do that. Anyway, so there's an internal support that has really nothing to do with the sphere itself. There you can see the ride ramps coming up. And here, crudely sketched again, is a secondary structure which is holding up those ramps. Most structures are topped out, which you see the topping out here of Spaceship Earth. However, that's not the finish of the structural steel. It actually was bottomed out, which I'll show you in a minute. It's a geodesic structure. It has these triangular struts, which are there infilled with basically a steel roof panel and some insulation and some waterproofing. They're all set into place, welded into place, and then where the waterproofing is at the pieces of the geodesic sphere, it's a new waterproofing goes on top of that, and then there's these outreachers or standoff legs. And they actually, you can see them here, but they actually also support some interior rain gutters because, the sphere that you see is not watertight. It's just sort of a rain shield, but water will get in there. And it was a way to try to keep it from all coming out the bottom. On the left is a section. So if you take a section through the sphere itself, on the right-hand side, you see the decorative panels, which are made of alucobond. And that's on the right side. On the left-hand side, you actually see the structure of where it's waterproofed. Here you can see some of the ride track, or actually the support ramp that's been poured in the structure itself. That was relatively easy. Hello. Until we came to this part here, it's probably pretty dark, and I think I have another picture of it. But the down ramp was extremely difficult. Come on. No, here's some ride track going in. Here we go, the down ramp. The down ramp was extremely difficult to pour because that is a very steep concrete pour, and it was quite something. Here you can see the ride system as it loops around. It was quite a bear to get built. Again, I had nothing to do with building it, but people would work, the engineers would do their testing, and then they'd disappear in their little room, and then BVC had to do set stuff, and so we were constantly running around up and down the sphere, trying to get people coordinated when they could work and when they couldn't work, and when it was safe and it wasn't safe. At least one tow bar broke during the testing, which was a pretty exciting evening. They didn't have certainly the computer systems that they have today to do this, simulate this. So as best as I could tell, they calculated it as best they can, and then it was full-scale trial and error. And things broke and jammed, and we were down to the wire. Ride testing was done concurrently with show and installation. We had 24/7 resident engineering coordination, and Tom Moses, who then was the head of our CID, truly made John Sovich and Miller Andrews sign in blood hours before the opening ceremony. I mean, it was a rough last week trying to get this thing to run consistently and from his standpoint safely. And he basically got them together the morning of the grand opening and said, you need to sign this paper or otherwise I will not allow the ride to open. What made it even more exciting is Spaceship Earth was the featured pavilion for day one. The riders were going to be the board of AT&T as well as the board of Disney. They got on the ride. We all had radios. They got on the ride. They circled through. We heard something like, the VIPs made it through, and then about 20 minutes later, we heard 101. And the ride was down the rest of the day. It was noisy, clunky. It was really something.
Bob, I want to thank you so much. I feel so much better. I knew this was going to be a rat's nest. Kent Bingham, a dear friend of mine, was the chief engineer on the major structural concepts on this building. And over the years, he told me about the experiences that you described. And then Kent would put in layman's terms, he says, this ride, thank God it was a separate thing sitting on that base turntable level. He said this was like a python wrapping around a steel, trying to twist this thing constantly.
It might have been kind of exciting to see the outside sphere rotate.
The ride forces were so unusual, and this goes back to the analysis that I had made. I thought, we're going too far too soon, and I'm so glad you got the headache.
Well, I understand they had an outside ride company for a while doing it, and they fired them, and then they decided to do it in-house. But anyway, it was, everybody worked hard, and it's an amazing ride, and I think they still have troubles with it. But it was a bear, and it was very, very noisy, at least in the beginning. At any rate, so here's the bottoming out of Spaceship Earth, where the last panel is being put in, and of course the American flag, and the crazy picture that you all have seen of people standing on top of it.
Bob, can we get through Imagination in about 90 seconds?
Yeah, Imagination opened late. It was a very complex ride system as well. You had vehicles, 4 vehicles each running around independently. They were being driven by a computer system. There was a third-party engineer who was doing all the script for it. He truly was working nearly 24 hours a day to try to get the script right. No one else knew how to do it. It was quite interesting. Also, these vehicles of 4 had to be injected into the rotating turntable at just the right time. Otherwise, they got crushed, which we only did once. But no one got hurt. There was a guy for the first couple of months that stood right at the entry to the turntable with a kill switch, and if they weren't approaching just right, he'd kill the ride. At any rate, turntable, it all went in. We opened late, I think in March or whatever. I thought, yay, no air bearings. We got regular railroad things. And I got a call about 3 months later and says the rails are rotating. And I said, what? And I went down and looked under the turntable, and sure enough, they had let loose, and the grout that was holding them up was turning the putty, and they were rotating. So I brought in about a 90-year-old railroad engineer, not one that drove trains, but was an engineer. And he says, don't you know that heavy loaded trains, we switch them back and forth. We don't always drive them the same direction. And I went, no. So anyway, somehow they fixed it, but this may be the real reason of the demise of imagination. I don't know. Any rate, we'll skip over that. Epcot Center, the big last thing, if you think that was bad, area development, trying to pour concrete, wow, it's a good thing people didn't get stuck in the concrete. Anyway, opening ceremony, I was much younger. It was a pretty amazing event. And I also got to work on World Showcase at the very end, post-opening, which was really terrific. And working with the Moroccans was really a great experience. So I think that does it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Steve, you'll have a little more time than that since we threw in the video of them testing the ride vehicle. So.
All righty, well, thanks. That brought back some good memories there, Bob. And I'll contribute a couple things on energy. For those who don't know, energy is driven by rotating tires down in the track that push on a platen on the bottom of the vehicles that push them up the hill, and then their weight carries them back down around, and they're fastened together with tie rods that occasionally break, or spaceship earth, I'm sorry. And those tie rods, when they break, they make a really loud noise. Well, we were working with Reliance Electric over on American Adventure, which was my main attraction. And the main guy from Reliance Electric came over to Spaceship Earth, and I went over there and found him. It was the first time he'd looked in that building, and he looked up and he looked at the down ramp and so on, and it was all his electric motors that were in the track, and they had the number of them that had been originally spec'd, and he looked at it and said, well, that ain't gonna work. And they ended up with 2 or 3 times that many motors by the time they got done. And
Well,
when
they kept
those
adding motors and motors and motors.
and when those tie rods would break, it would rip out the audio bus bar as the vehicles dragged around the track. And so the poor audio engineer who was working on that ride, if you ever went on that ride in the early days and you heard all this crackling and dropping out of audio, it was because his bus bar had been ripped out half a dozen times during the testing of the ride. And I remember when, if you were there during the first couple of months, there was a guy standing in the dark. It was kind of like the Haunted Mansion at the top of the ramp. And he was standing there to make sure that the vehicles rotated all the way so that they could go back down again. If they didn't, his job was to rotate them by hand.
Yeah, I understand one time it didn't.
We got a buzz in. Somebody get over there with a mic. There's Hugh. Hugh's got something to say. They're running up with a mic now. Yes, no? Or just holler it out and I'll repeat it.
I was one of those guys, hand turning and staring.
When we have Hugh Darley later on the stage, we'll have him tell that story in 30 seconds. All right.
And I'll do one other thing that's out of order, but you were talking about imagination and so on, and that became my job in March to get that open. I was the first systems engineer that Disney ever had that was in charge of all of the different things happening in the building from an engineering standpoint on the ride to try to get the mechanics and the software people and the electrical people all working together. And eventually we got it open by getting the mechanical engineer to agree that the vehicle bumpers could bump into each other on the ride. And that was an agreement that he regretted for the rest of his life, I'm sure, because he spent the next few months redesigning the bumpers every couple of weeks and replacing the bumpers on all the vehicles. But we did get it to work, and trying to detect whether the turntable was going to crush a vehicle entering into that slot was really a challenge because we had no computers to speak of to work with. So we were setting up optical brake beams in all kinds of weird diagonal directions so that if a vehicle was there when the turntable came to a certain spot, we would kill it, and the turntable was so heavy it would still drift for a while. So we did catch one of them one time, but nobody was hurt. As you said, it was before opening. But that was a big challenge to get. And again, that was another one of those rides with the tires rotating and the track pushing on the bottom of the vehicles. And it's hard to control the exact position of a vehicle like that. We had all these little fins on the bottom of the vehicles where you could tell where it was within 2 inches, but you couldn't tell where it was if you forgot where it was. You could only tell that it was still going. And so it didn't do you a lot of good, because unless you knew, okay, here's a vehicle coming and this is the start of it, okay, now we can track it for 2 inches. But if it stops and the system comes back up again, it's like, well, there's something moving, but we have no idea whether it's the front or the back of the something. So that's not the way rides are done these days, thank goodness. So anyway, quickly, some of you might know me from one of my books. I've got 3 of them about theme parks. One is, this is the latest edition of Building a Better Mouse, and it talks about the crazy time in Department 510, which was the electronic engineering section. And electronic engineering now is a big thing, but way back in the 80s, it wasn't that common a thing because there weren't computers everywhere running our lives, there weren't programmers everywhere, so it was kind of an obscure thing. And so this department, which gradually grew to about 200 people, consisted of the people who did the audio and the video and the ride control and the show control. And Linda Alcorn, my wife, is in the audience. She doesn't like public speaking, but she will be happy to chat with anybody. If you want to come by during the break and meet her and talk with her, and she's the one who got me into this business. When she was in the 3rd grade, she decided she wanted to be a Disney Imagineer, and that's the only job she ever applied for. I'm also an engineer because she was an engineer. We met when she was 14. Both our fathers were engineers. When she went to UCLA, she checked the engineering box somewhat randomly on her college application, and so I followed her into the School of Engineering as well. And she applied as the first female engineer at Imagineering. In 1979, she was hired as a wirelister to start. And by 3 years later, she was in charge of the show control for 10 of the pavilions on opening day at EPCOT. So her big attractions were World of Motion and Canada, France, and China. And then she was also responsible for all of the other little unnamed things like the Denmark restroom and so on, which were vital to the parade control and turning the lights and so on around the park and so on. So this book is about that period of time. She's in it. We also wrote a book together called Molly Builds a Theme Park, which is a kid's book, and I have a book called Theme Park Design. And so I'm going to really quickly go through these slides because you guys know most of this stuff, so I'll just tell interesting stories. This is what we worked with in those days. Take a look at Linda's desk. There is no computer on it. There's not a typewriter. There's nothing. There's a bunch of paper and a pencil, and that's how this park was designed and engineered. When EPCOT opened, in terms of electronics, if we needed a computer, we built it. We had to build it. We could not buy a computer. Other than some mini computers at EPCOT Central, you couldn't buy an IPMBC. It didn't exist in those areas. So we built them from scratch, programmed them from scratch, but most of it was done without computers. And they'd learned in Magic Kingdom that it was very maintenance intensive to have all of your equipment hidden away in closets all over the park. So EPCOT had this great idea to build EPCOT Central and put all of the equipment there, which was a great idea for the time, but one that didn't last because, as we all know, then computers came in, they got small, they became reliable, and now everything has been scattered out around the park just the way it was at Disneyland originally, because it now fits in an even tinier closet in all the different pavilions. So this captures a time, we're in April, we're being told you can do it. Nobody in Department 510 has been to the site. Most of them have never been to Florida. We're all in California. We're working on this thing. And we've never seen it. And then early on in 1982, some people start going down to the site, seeing it coming back and going, oh, we're in big trouble. So 6 months to opening day, this is what the site looks like. Now, I have opened a lot of theme parks since then. I have a company, Alcorn McBride. We make the audio, video, and control systems that companies like Disney and Universal can now just buy as a product off the shelf, put into their attraction, and that's it. They're done. But we were designing all of this stuff in Department 510 from scratch. And when I saw this picture 6 months before opening, I'm 25 years old, 26 years old, no problem. It'll probably open in 6 months. If I saw that picture today, 6 months before a park opened, it's like, what are you guys thinking? This is like going to open in 84.
I mean, most of us were so young. It's like, well, okay, it looks like a lot of work, but we can do it.
Yeah.
Today, I'd say, God, you're crazy.
So now we're in May. Linda goes to Florida for the first time. And this is what EPCOT looked like in May. Oh, okay. And so now we're in June, 4 months to opening day. Okay, I get to go to Florida. Now, my very first trip was not on the Mouse, but I did go back and forth on the Mouse a few times. It's a cool plane. I guess there were about 10 people typically that were on the plane. And it was nice. There was a stewardess, and if you asked for a red wine, they'd go in and they'd pull out George Little to her private reserve or whatever. Oh, yeah, that'll do. And there are couches on one side of the plane, and then there's seats where you can face each other, and the highly treasured seats were the foursome. You could play bridge, and it was a long bridge game, let me tell you, because that plane did not go fast. That plane went so slow that when you were going back to California, you had to stop and get gas in Texas. This is our office. It's also known as the women's locker room, and that's where 510 was based in the field. And this was my office, the luxurious office above Dick Nunes's office in the Sun Bank building, except that our space was a concrete floor and unfinished walls. But I had this lovely view. And this is where we lived during EPCOT. We were all at Fort Wilderness. That's 2 illegally parked cars because only 1 car per trailer, but they couldn't deal with the fact. So when we first went to Florida, Linda had a trailer and I had a trailer. And so we saved the money by combining the trailers, but then we had to argue about parking 2 cars there forever. So then finally in the summer, they opened a monorail up to go preview EPCOT, and you could actually go out and ride on the monorail and see it under construction. So there I am from the monorail. And so it looks kind of finished from when they take the guests out in there on the monorail ride, but here's what it looked like on the other side.
It looks like that right now.
For the last 3 years.
Yeah, for the last 3 years.
Yeah, so now we're 3 weeks from opening, and Linda and I unwisely decide to walk from World Showcase over to get lunch at the Canada Pavilion where they were testing food service. And there was no pavement. This is a view from the top of American Adventure that I spliced together at the time. It's standing on these American Gardens, does not exist at this point, 3 months away. Yeah, this 3 months out, France. 3 months, no problem. We'll get this all patched up, no problem. Canada, yeah. Yeah, all we need is a little concrete here and guests can come in right away. This is World of Motion. This is the VIP lounge. It's not quite ready for VIPs yet. And this is that famous ramp in Spaceship Earth. This was the Reliance Electric guys do it. So here's EPCOT Central. And I didn't realize when I took this picture that most of my career after EPCOT was going to involve replacing those big orange things. Those are the bin loops, and each one of them had tape in it, and they'd play 32 tracks of audio that was sent out to the various pavilions, and really big pavilions might have more than one of those. And the tape was just a scramble inside of the things, and they'd have to turtle wax the surface in there every night in order to get the tape to slide across. And so when they built EPCOT and they put everything in EPCOT in Central, they thought, okay, well, this would be great for servicing purposes. It'd be easy to service. And they were very careful about all of the things to keep the park from going down, high security, although the keypad on opening day on the door, they brought the insurance inspector around to inspect for fire and everything. And the guy in charge of EPCOT Central came and typed his key into the keypad and opened the door and let the guy in. The keypad wasn't connected to anything, but the insurance guy was very impressed. But the one thing they forgot is that about a month or so into EPCOT being open, they had some painters who were painting in the downstairs area below Communicore. And they came in, and of course they're painting, so they're taking electrical plates off of the wall and stuff downstairs. It's just like a garbage area or whatever, no big thing. But they got to turn the power off to the breakers that goes to the little electrical panels downstairs. So they flipped that one little breaker off to turn off the power. That power went to every bin loop in Central. All of the bin loops went down. Every attraction at EPCOT went down because of that one circuit breaker being turned off. So not everything was all that well planned out. This is what the construction workers would do if the porta potties started to get dirty, and the next step is that they would set them on fire. And then Glenn Burkett, who I worked for on American Adventure, he was a pilot, and so he took a bunch of us engineers up in a plane to fly over EPCOT. There he is, and let Linda fly the plane. She'd never flown a plane before, so that was exciting. And so here's aerial pictures. Okay, now this is the summer of 1982, folks. EPCOT from the air 2 to 3 months before opening. Where's the other half of Communicore in this picture?
Why did they even bother it? The building, it was gone now.
There you go. So,
Saved them a lot of time and money.
yeah, really, you can't anticipate some of these things, I guess. This is American Adventure, still no pavement. Yeah.
Yeah, the pavement started at American Adventure essentially and worked
Yeah.
its way to the front.
Yeah.
And we almost didn't make it.
This is the picture on the first edition of my book. By the way, for those who have published books or whatever, the best favor you can do us is leave us some reviews on Amazon, because nobody else will find the book. And until you get 50 or 100 reviews, nobody finds the book on Amazon. And it's amazing, but like 1 out of 100 people who read a book leave a review. So we appreciate those reviews, folks. So here's American Adventure backstage. We'll go quickly because we're now on negative time. These are the cranes that were used to drop the lifts into position. American Adventure has a big carriage that's got 10 lifts on it, and then there's some 4 stationary lifts on the side. Well, they're kind of stationary. And this carriage runs underneath the audience. And so this is a view from the back of the building. You're seeing a partition that was there to keep the dust. I don't know if it was to keep the dust out of our area or to keep the dust out of the guest area, but one side or the other. So they're lowering these giant lifts into this carriage. And each lift is 14 feet high, and it's got to come up 14 feet, which is a good trick, in 10 seconds during the show so that you can see it. And it's got to come up. There's one of the lifts with Glenn next to it. That's the projector, the rear projector from the back. It's now all video, of course. And these are the cabinets that we worked on that control the whole show. So they sequenced all the valves that have to raise and lower all those lifts and control the carriage motion back and forth. If you put a lift up underneath the audience, you squish all of the animated figures, which is undesirable. If you have a lift up and you move the carriage, then it either knocks down the rear projection screen or it smashes the animated figures into the audience, which is also undesirable. And so we actually used a ride control system to control that rather than a show control system, because the ride control system was the only thing that we had in Department 510 that had computers in it so that we could program it and program the sequencing. And for one lift, this is the kind of stuff that you're dealing with. This is all of the hydraulics to sequence all of those different little valves and things to make that lift go up. It's running at 8,000 PSI. You have 2 choices with hydraulic oil. You can get the kind that is highly corrosive, or you can get the kind that is flammable. So pick your favorite. Linda has since replaced the whole control system on American Adventure, and actually Linda has either designed or redesigned the control system for virtually every attraction at Walt Disney World. So if you have any questions about any attraction, she knows about 100 more attractions than I do. So now we're 2 months from opening, and this is the schedule. Hard to read on this, but you can blow it up later. We were working 100-hour weeks, and this is just the electronic engineering staff working on American Adventure, and our shifts are aligned so that each of us has their own, 16-hour-a-day shift, and then you get 8 hours to sleep. And when we're sleeping, our radio's still on, and somehow you've trained yourself that if your call sign comes on the radio while you're asleep, it wakes you up. Here's a view of the lifts from the top in American Adventure. You can see Mark Twain down there in the Centennial set, so it moves, indexes, and so on. Another view from the top. There's a lot of stuff there. Okay, now we're in September. Things are getting close. All right, so now we've got the partition down. We're now dust-free, which means that the dirt is only about 3 inches deep down there in the pit area. And so you can see George Washington on his horse, and you can see all the way through to the theater. That's the theater beyond you. So this is a view from the back door of American Adventure. You're looking through several hundred feet of distance here. And so we're doing lighting adjust. It would be nice if we had a screen, but there isn't one yet. And so there's a World War II sub doing more lighting adjust. So this is the point where Davey Fighton is in the theater now, starting to program lifts, which is interfering with our ability to program the lifts because he's programming the figures on the lifts. So now we're trying to figure out how to organize the time between our test and adjust, which has somehow become negative, and his show control programming, which is also rapidly becoming negative, and still no screen back there to work on. So here's the view. Now they're finally pulling the screen across. You can see it making its transition across the supports there. It's the white thing. And there's also a scrim lowered down in this picture. That's the Declaration of Independence scrim. Here's the screen coming. Now it's in position. This is our team, spelling out AA here. Alcoholics Anonymous. There's your bin loops, and beyond it, those are tape cue cabinets like they used to use on radio stations, and that's how triggered sounds work in attractions. Back in the day, when a vehicle would cross a certain spot, it would trigger a tape, and the tape would play back whatever you were supposed to be hearing in that spot. And so when Horizons opened a year later, there were 170 tape starts just for Horizons, and we had no way to control them. So that became my next emergency project. I think about a week before Horizons opened, October 1st of '83, we finally got all of those tape starts working back and forth between Horizons and Central using the software that I had written to run American Adventure. And so that brings us to September 6th. Cleverest thing the company ever did was to invite the construction workers to come to a preview for their families of Epcot Center because it meant they had to finish the pavement. They had to get everything cleaned up. Because
we did the same
families
thing
were
for
coming.
Grand Floridian Hotel. I took this lesson and said, we're going to do the same thing.
Yeah. And so this is also the day that John Zovich and a couple other vice presidents realized that everything that was going to be working on that preview day in Epcot was Linda's attraction. And suddenly she had great visibility because they were following her around all day saying, "Do you need anything? What do you need? Is this attraction working?" Because those were the only ones that were up and running, World of Motion and the 3 theaters. And so these were our parking passes to get in there. And that finally brings us to October. And we did it, except that, this is the team here and in California that did it on October 1st, and American Adventure had a grand opening scheduled for the 23rd of October, but American Adventure wasn't quite ready. And so I spent the night before October 1st, 41 years ago, sleeping on the floor of that pit, keeping the American Adventure running all night long because we found out that if the hydraulic oil cooled off, the attraction wouldn't run anymore, and it took hours to get it back up. So Glenn came and relieved me about 7:30 in the morning. I went home and I slept through all the grand opening of EPCOT Center. But when I woke up, I found out that the attraction had gone down about 2 hours after I left and never opened on October 1st. We got it reliable within a week or two and greatly improved by the end of the month. But it was quite the struggle. They did fet us a wonderful party, the Spaceship Earth Gala. We cleaned up pretty nice for that. And then there were a lot of loose ends. So we were consigned to this lovely office space down underneath Communicore next to the dumpster. And worked on EPCOT for another year, getting Imagination opening in March, Horizons the following October. And it's so much easier now. This is the stuff my company makes. You need a ride playback system, call and you order one. You need 32 channels of sound synchronized to your ride system, call and order it. You need a PA system for theme parks, call and order it. So this is where Disney and Universal, this is where they get their stuff now, is they call us and we sell them all the stuff that we didn't have for EPCOT. But think about EPCOT Center's opening day. Think about the amount of computing power that it took to run all of EPCOT. Even the World Key touch screens, which were very sophisticated at the time. They had some video, live video from operators that you could call up. They had touch screen maps. The computers sending out animation data from EPCOT Central, and the computers doing monitoring of 30,000 different monitor points for hydraulic pressure, whether motors are running and stuff, all over the park. Think about that, and now think about your phone. Your phone has more computing power than all of the computer equipment at EPCOT Center on opening day. One phone. That's how much technology has changed.
Thank you, Steve Alcorn, Bob Holland, and Bob Gurr. Thank you. We're done.